So in this segment, we're going to be discussing the US calls for revived UK trade talks after the Northern Ireland deal. So senior lawmakers in Washington are calling for a reinvigoration of trade talks between the US and the UK after Britain and the EU struck a deal over Northern Ireland that removes a huge source of tension between Washington and London. The push comes after members of Congress from both sides of the aisle applauded the Windsor Framework on post-Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland as a turning point in the bilateral relationship between the US and the UK, and a sign a more pragmatic leadership has returned to the British government under Sunak. Quote, ever since the Brexit vote, which was now 7 years ago, the biggest stumbling block by far has been the Northern Ireland issue and the fact that the UK and US did not see eye to eye. End quote. Brendan Boyle, a Democratic congressman from Pennsylvania, told the FT. Quote, there is no question that a major irritant in the bilateral US-UK relationship has been taken off the table, end quote. And so you can see, the Northern Ireland situation was a big deal for a lot of these American politicians. Quote, I think hopefully this will be behind us in short order. There will be trade discussions, end quote, added Bill Keating, a Democratic lawmaker from Massachusetts. And it goes to show you how concerned the US is over Northern Ireland, given that we were told by Truss that we wouldn't get a trade deal by 2030. Not saying we will, but getting bilateral deals would be better than what we have now. Not as good as a free trade agreement, but something. Chris Coons, the Democratic senator from Delaware and a close ally of US President Joe Biden, introduced legislation on Thursday that would give the president the authority to negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK. This has moved in the space of around a week, I think, which is pretty quick, especially for the US, which moves pretty slowly for the most part. And let's not forget, I think it was Brendan Boyle who, when Daniel Hannan said, there were talks of a trade deal in America and all of this kind of stuff, I think it was Brendan Boyle, who's on the Ways and Means Committee, which deals with trade, said, well, I've heard nothing. And then Daniel Hannan kind of had to shut the hell up. The bill would give Biden 2 years or under a few months into a hypothetical second term to secure a trade agreement and fast-track a vote in Congress to approve any deal. The proposal was co-sponsored by John Thune, a senator from South Dakota, who is the second senior Republican in the upper chamber of Congress. So you can see there's bipartisan support here, which is very rare for America. The only time there's bipartisan support is when it's to screw over the American people and over Northern Ireland. That's it. The only two times you'll see bilateral support. Maybe over Israel as well. Maybe. It shows that the US does want to do a deal with the UK. The timescale is unrealistic given the amount of lobbying that will have to happen and how weak the UK is in trade negotiations. Every part of America wants a piece of the UK. Pharmaceuticals, farmers, so many different groups. But the US could have bullied us in trade negotiations at any time, but they held off on giving us an optics win because of the situation around the protocol. They also kept the Trump-era steel sanctions on us a bit longer for a few extra months, just to make sure we remember that they can put tariffs on us at any time. Although Biden has sought to resolve some of the trade disputes with the US allies that raged during the Trump administration, he has not pushed for big steps to liberalize trade. But Keating said Biden understood the need to strengthen America's allies economically, particularly in light of rising competition with China, saying, quote, even for President Biden, who's not a free trader, I think he sees a benefit of moving forward, but it's incremental maybe, Keating said. And it feels like the Marshall Plan in the sense of the US trying to help with economic prosperity to help countries avoid falling into extremes. It also gives the US a lot more soft power over countries that it does trade with. But it does give the opposite as well, in a sense of countries that trade together are less likely to get into fights. But using trade to liberalize countries doesn't really work. We look at Russia and China, at least for the most part. But I think in the context of most countries, it will help increase trade between Western nations, which I think Biden is trying to do here. They talk specifically about allies. Also, the US is looking at bringing back manufacturing, so by being more trade liberal, it will help potentially with American manufacturing because it's another export market. By doing bilateral deals with the UK, especially bullying ones that are going to be more in favour of the US, it might help the US export more goods, which helps manufacturing on their end. This isn't purely for altruistic reasons here. The US is still in a trade war with China, so clearly, given that Biden has said and done, he believes in bringing manufacturing back to America, but also exporting these goods to ally kind of other Western nations that he sees as allies. So it's a bit messy there. But point being is, Biden's looking at bringing back manufacturing and is also looking at doing more trade with allies, making them less reliant on China and Russia, for example, and that kind of strengthens the bond between kind of Western nations, we could argue. So yeah, he's an interesting dude, no doubt. He's different to a lot of the presidents we've had more recently, even quite different to Obama in a lot of ways. I'm not saying Biden's great by a long stretch. He's no Bernie Sanders, but he's done a lot better than I think a lot of people anticipated. And it's interesting that once, if the Northern Ireland issue can be finally resolved, the Americans are willing to do trade talks, and it's bipartisan. So even if Biden goes, there could be the next president could be open to doing talks. Just hope it's not Trump, because that guy will absolutely decimate us at trade talks. It'll be a nightmare. But anyways, I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.